The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Uqaqtittiji. On September 19, I had asked a question about funding the hunters and trappers organizations in Nunavut, and the government could not provide any answers. Are they not aware of their legal obligation to ensure that the Nunavut Agreement is implemented, to make sure that there's adequate funding for hunters and trappers organizations? The Nunavut Wildlife Management Board funds the hunters and trappers organizations whose mandate includes to ensure conservation and sustainable use of wildlife, to protect rights and priorities of Inuit, and regulate access to wildlife. Unfortunately, the hunters and trappers organizations have a lack of resources. One hunters and trappers organization in every community that I've visited and what I've seen so far is that most of their offices are in places that should be condemned. They have only one support staff, and with all the lack of resources, they are expected to help protect Inuit rights to hunting and manage wildlife. They are the voice of Inuit in the environmental assessment processes. The federal government levels of funding to the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board was recently reported in their annual report for this year in 2025. It included about $21 million total for all 25 hunters and trappers organizations, plus the 3 regional wildlife offices. If we did our math right, that would include about $700,000 per hunters and trappers organization per year. Compare that to the federal funding for resource extraction projects in Nunavut. Yesterday, the Liberals tabled their budget, which included new funding to Natural Resources Canada to create a new fund called the Critical Minerals Sovereign Fund, which we understand will make strategic investments in critical minerals projects and companies, include equity investments, loan guarantees, and offtake agreements. When I think about the fund, when I read the budget, this meant $2 billion over 5 years, starting next year, an additional $50 million over 5 years to Natural Resources Canada to support the delivery of the fund, which would calculate roughly to $410 million per year for Critical Mineral Fund. That is an astonishing 585 times more than they give to local Inuit organizations who are protecting wildlife, environment, and protecting cultural practices. The Liberals give more to extract natural resources from Inuit land than support wildlife conservation from cultural practices. This is not a balanced approach. Both Liberals and Conservative governments are good at apologizing, but not acting on reconciliation. I challenge this government to stop enforcing colonial policies. Does this government believe keeping hunters and trappers less resourced than extraction companies is keeping Canada strong?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Northern and Arctic Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Nunavut for raising serious concerns about funding for Inuit programs and the capacity of hunters and trappers organizations to participate in environmental assessments. I also I think she provides continued and really very important advocacy for Nunavut, and these are valid concerns, and they deserve a clear response. Article 5.7 of the Nunavut Agreement sets out the special features of Inuit harvesting rights. It establishes hunters and trappers organizations in every community and regional wildlife organizations to manage quotas, regulate harvesting, and represent Inuit interests in wildlife management. And these bodies are not optional, they're treaty obligations and core institutions under the agreement. So again, I thank the member for Nunavut for raising these concerns. For years, organizations in Nunavut have not received sufficient funding, and recent years have seen increased costs. Canada funds the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, who in turn supports these organizations, and this is a legal obligation. These organizations are expected to participate in environmental assessments, manage wildlife sustainably, and uphold Inuit harvesting rights. Until recently, funding for these organizations was limited. In March 2025, the Government of Canada signed a renewed Nunavut Agreement implementation contract with Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated and the Government of Nunavut for 2024 to 2034. And this contract provides $1.5 billion from 2024 to 2034, plus $77.6 million annually thereafter to support NTI, the Government of Nunavut, and 5 institutions of public government, including 27 hunters and trappers organizations and 3 regional wildlife organizations. This funding will strengthen their capacity to participate in environmental reviews and manage wildlife effectively. In 2024-2025, the Government of Canada provided a renewed base annual budget of more than $7.5 million for the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board, $7.1 million for the regional wildlife organizations, and $14 million for the hunters and trappers organizations. Funding is also adjusted annually for inflation. Special attention was paid in the renewal to make sure that these bodies would be sufficiently resourced to carry out their mandate under the Nunavut Agreement. This renewed funding base represents approximately a 39% increase for the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board and a 169% increase for the regional wildlife organizations and hunters and trappers organizations. This, I believe, is significant. Mr. Speaker, before closing, I'd like to just take a moment to highlight a few other Budget 25 items that are good news for Northerners. Many major projects today include Indigenous and territorial governments, Northern communities, financial institutions, and development corporations in designing, financing, and leading, and that is reconciliation in action. And our goal is to make certain that federal tools, financing, and regulatory systems support Indigenous communities in their involvement. I'll briefly mention the $1 billion Arctic Infrastructure Fund over 4 years to support economic development and job creation in Northern communities while protecting Canada's sovereignty. In addition to protect and advance the interests of Canada, the interests of Inuit and Nunavut, we're proposing to amend the Territorial Lands Act to support responsible and respectable stewardship of Crown land in Nunavut. I'll briefly mention the commitment to Nunavut University as well. These are just a few measures. I'll close there. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Uqaqtittiji, I'm glad to see that the Liberal government understands that it has legal obligations under the Nunavut Agreement. Unfortunately, some of the increased investments still aren't enough. As I mentioned earlier, I've seen all 25 hunters and trappers organizations. I've met with all of them. As I mentioned earlier, some of them are in offices that should be condemned, and we need to make sure that they have proper resources to participate in the environmental assessment process. The industry and the HTOs both contribute to that process. Is it any surprise that industry's voice is so much louder, bigger, and more influential in that process than the hunters and trappers organizations? I ask again, will this Liberal government better fund hunters and trappers organizations so that they can fully engage in the environmental assessment process?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Northern and Arctic Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member again for her concerns about Inuit programs and hunters and trappers organizations and for meeting directly with these organizations. These bodies are treaty obligations under the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement and essential for wildlife management and environmental reviews. Inadequate funding issues did change in March 2025 when Canada signed a renewed 10-year Nunavut Agreement implementation contract, providing $1.5 billion through 2034, plus $77.6 million annually thereafter. And that includes 39% more for the Nunavut Wildlife Management Board and 169% for hunters and trappers organizations and regional wildlife organizations, with annual budgets now indexed for inflation. Lots more to say on this topic, and I certainly will be continuing to engage with the member on this important area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.